Isn't this a grand and ridiculous space? Only through a just great vision can you get a place like this. This is so spectacular. I have three folks to thank. And I want to start, of course, with Henry Cisneros. That Henry is an amazing leader for the built environment. Obviously, you know him as mayor of San Antonio when he was introduced earlier this morning. How he reinvented public housing in this country as Secretary of HUD. How he now is an investor and developer. His tagline is smart money for smart growth. But keep in mind that this is Henry's third book that he's pulled together. He didn't need to do this, but he's so committed to this. I think you'll agree with me that Henry Cisneros is the leader of the built environment in this country, where we put 35% of our wealth into the places that we live, work, and play. And I want to just thank Henry so very much. I also want to thank Margaret Dyer Chamberlain and Jane Hickey of Stanford University. They were the wicked editors who made all of us writers look a whole lot smarter than we are. And then finally, I want to introduce and thank Michael Gwynn, my co-author, a former student of mine, now a senior living developer. Michael, please stand up. You go to Michael when you want to actually get some of this stuff done on the ground. So why are we here talking about this? I think it's pretty obvious. We baby boomers, our entire lives, have been saying, talk about us, talk about us. We're the center of the universe. That's why we wrote this book, of course. As was said earlier by Mayor Littlefield, that we are the pig and the python. And we've affected every institution that we've encountered, and so naturally we want to, once again, let's talk about us. But we're discussing senior housing and this phrase, senior housing in place, or aging in place. And from the beginning of this process, 3 years ago now, I was saying, no, it should be aging and place. That we're talking about creating places where people can age gracefully. And it might be where you're living right now, or it might be that you're going to move, but whatever, we're going to create places that we can gracefully age. And it's also, though, a reflection, and it's really a nice coincidence, that it's a reflection of the structural change by which we're building the built environment. It started in the mid-90s, that we began to see our downtowns turn around, like downtown Chattanooga, that I've known for 30 years. And I worked with Ron on that, on many of the projects in downtown Chattanooga for the last generation. But it really started, and we baby boomers have to swallow our pride to recognize that this structural change in how we're building the built environment really started with the millennials, our kids. They're leading this charge. Their generation is just about the same size as the baby boomers. Together, we represent more than 50% of the entire country's population. And the millennials started this demand for walkable urban places, which is the other option by which we can build the built environment. Obviously, we baby boomers grew up in the era where we built drivable suburban places. Well, that pendulum, which we pushed all the way over, is now coming back. And starting with the millennials, but now with the baby boomers, as they begin to downsize and retire, are looking for walkable urban solutions. And we not just know this due to all the survey research. The most recent National Association of Realtors survey once again demonstrated the pent-up demand for walkable urban, but the real sign that I look for, as not just a researcher, but as a real estate developer, is what are people willing to pay for this stuff? And it's in the price premiums that the market is paying for walkable urban places, otherwise known as gentrification. We have so much pent-up demand for walkable urban places that it will take another generation to satisfy that demand, which is why we need to focus on affordable housing and have a conscious affordable housing strategy in this country, which will take the place of the current affordable housing strategy, which is, as you know, drive until you qualify. So we have a panelist today, and if they can come up and get mic'd up, that includes one of my co-authors, or one of the authors in the book. And I think you have all their bios. Here is Ellen Dunham Jones, who has written the book on suburban retrofits, co-authored with June. June's back there. Who's co-authored the book on retrofitting suburbia. It's the Bible for how to do this. And then Christine Nocar, who has been developing senior living places. In fact, her organization, as you can see from the agenda, is the largest nonprofit affordable housing developer in the country, much of it of senior housing. And then finally, Matthias Hollwich, who leads a fascinating organization, and I think you'll be very pleased with his presentation. So we're going to have 3 very quick presentations, and then I'll begin to ask them some questions, and then we'll go to the floor. So, Ellen, please.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be here and just reiterate all of the wonderful thank yous to everyone. I really just want to leave you with 2 big ideas. And these really are based on the research that June Williamson and I have done. And I should have some slides. Are they? Okay, great. I know the slides are kind of hard to see. This wonderful room, the one thing it's not so great for is seeing slides. But this is all based on the research that June and I have done. So idea number 1, the attributes of the single-family house that may have served a household well when they were a young family are increasingly becoming obstacles to aging in place well. And for all of the reasons that I think so many of us know very well, the large lots privacy now leads to isolation and maintenance issues. The single-use zoning and the distance from shops and businesses that help to reinforce a sense of a community centered on the school was great when you had kids. Now it distances you from everything and access to daily needs as one's aging. One can also certainly get into the lack of walkability, the need to drive everywhere, all of those issues with our typical single-family home neighborhoods. So the question is, how do we accommodate all of those seniors, the majority of whom are living in suburban situations where they really can't walk many places, they're living in single-family homes. How do we allow them to live more independently there? And my answer to that question is also the second point that I want to make, which is we need to link the needs of an aging population with the opportunities provided by aging suburban properties. And we've got scads of them. We are surrounded by dead big box stores, dying malls, aging commercial strip corridors, office parks, garden apartment, you name it, park and rides, you name it. And June and I have documented how these very unlikely properties that nobody looks at and says, oh, I want to live at that dead big box. No one looks at them right away with enthusiasm. But that in fact, when you do look at the before and afters of these projects, they're really quite convincing that change is not only possible, it's extremely promising. These places can and are being re-inhabited, redeveloped, and regreened into much more sustainable places that are now walkable, compact, and integrating seniors with access to their daily needs and with multi-generational communities. So this first slide shows just a few examples of the many examples that have specifically integrated senior housing in with other multi-age housing into suburban redevelopment. So at the top, Mashpee Commons is one of about 40 town centers that have been rebuilt on the sites of dead malls and strip malls, including Rockville Town Center here in DC. And Mashpee Commons has become a NORC on what was a strip mall. It is now, for the past 20 years, it has consistently attracted about 30% of the folks renting the apartments above the shops have been seniors. Several other malls the mall has remained, but what their strategy is to build senior housing, townhouses, other forms of more compact living on some portion of their parking lots. So in the middle images here, Thornton Place in Seattle. The senior housing is on the corner, and it faces market housing across a new bioswale park that is cleaning all the runoff from the parking lots system that it's a part of. The extension of transit into the suburbs has also triggered the integration of new senior housing into transit-oriented developments and transit corridors. In DC, this is happening in the redevelopment of a subdivision adjacent to the Vienna stop, as well as along the planned streetcar line on Columbia Pike. Now, let's see, the next slide. Okay, there we go. Another useful trend in this is the re-inhabitation of underperforming suburban properties with senior centers. And again, many of them are multi-generational. At the top of this slide is a former 90,000 square foot Kmart in Wisconsin Rapids that has been adaptively reused as a senior center and a Montessori school. At the bottom of the slide, it's likely to make the architects smile, but I know not many others, is a former gas station in Quebec designed by celebrated modernist architect Mies van der Rohe that has just been retrofitted into a senior and youth center. Now, while both of these examples still require most of their patrons to arrive by car, they are providing community gathering spaces where none previously existed, because the suburbs were so focused, the social life, on the life of the school. And now that community anchor is no longer relevant for the majority of the suburban population, there's a great need for more of these third places, community gathering spaces in suburbia. Parks can also help seniors better age in place and connect with more other residents. And there are a number of examples of vacant properties that have been re-greened into spaces where seniors and other generations can interact. So now, the next slide, this one shows one of the big development trends in general has been meds and eds, medical centers and educational facilities. We know of at least a dozen dying malls and big boxes that have been retrofitted to bring more medical services out to suburban seniors. Up on the top of the slide here, the entire second floor of the 100 Oaks Mall in Nashville has become the University of Vanderbilt's medical center. There are numerous, over 100 minute clinics and Doctors Express and home health aid services that have also expanded into many, many malls. Similarly, we've seen a lot of health and wellness centers taking over former big box stores to provide facilities for pools, gymnasiums, as well as very targeted counseling and rehab to really especially target older people and get them exercising. And so this example at the bottom is a former Kmart in Oregon that has become what's called Wellspring. But as much as it makes sense to recycle existing buildings and to update them with uses compatible with an aging population, the real challenge ahead is making the suburbs less automobile dependent, as I know Chris has also written so eloquently about. This involves retrofitting our suburban, car-oriented infrastructure with a pattern of walkable blocks and transit. Here in DC, Columbia Pike, now to be extended into Bailey's Crossroads, has upzoned 4 nodes with more pedestrian-oriented urban buildings whose taxes will go to help to support a new streetcar. So we're able to actually, again, use that, bringing in a more compact living model to also support the much needed transit. Local seniors have been very engaged in the discussions at Columbia Pike and actually had a very strong role. And they're concerned about the gentrification and affordability, and that's sort of the next challenge with a lot of these projects. So all of the strategies that I've discussed, the integration of senior housing, senior centers, new uses, town centers, and transit, come together in what the Atlanta Regional Commission and the firm of Dwani Plater Zyberg called lifelong communities. The bottom two plans show how a landscape of suburban strip malls and aging garden apartments can be redeveloped with a walkable street grid, a mix of new housing, including for seniors, so as to create nodes that then are dense enough to be able to support jitney service. The first of these is under construction in Mableton, Georgia, but there are a lot more around.
Great. Thank you, Ellen. As you can see, a lot of thought being given to how to take what we have in abundance, dead and dying malls, and turn them into livable, walkable places. Christine is with the National Church Residences, the largest affordable housing nonprofit in the country, and she's the one that's delivering so many of these projects on the ground. Christine?
Yeah, thank you. There we go. I'm really going to talk to you more about the preservation of affordable senior housing. National Church Residences is the largest provider and developer of affordable senior housing in the country. We also are the largest manager as well. We have right now over 330 properties across the United States and in Puerto Rico. Oh, back, thank you. Oop, come on back. It's not going. Oh. There we are. Thank you. Knew I would do this. As you can see from the map, we are all over the United States. Read a couple stats. We have 297 senior housing communities, 26 family housing communities, 4 permanent supportive housing communities, 5 assisted living, skilled nursing facilities, 3 home and community-based service agencies, which serve 450 clients and growing, 6 adult daycare centers, and 4 continuing care retirement communities. And currently, because I'm the Director of Construction Management, we have 9 projects under construction, and 6 of those are preservation of our existing portfolio, meaning they are live renovation projects. Now I'll move forward. So today I wanted to just go over and talk about our preservation efforts. Since 2002, we have added 24 properties to our portfolio, meaning we have purchased these distressed properties from others, and we are now managing them and redeveloping them. We have also, since 2002, rehabbed over 30 of our own properties. And right now, in the queue, coming up, before Christmas, most likely, I have 10 projects, rehab projects, going under construction. So we are quite busy. Today I wanted to focus on 3 projects that recently completed and just kind of give you an idea of kind of the breadth of what we do to preserve affordable housing. First, I wanted to talk about our efforts with using the Assisted Living Conversion Grant, HUD's Assisted Living Conversion Grant. Wanted to focus on the middle property there, that is Portage Trail. Portage was purchased in 1991. We purchased it. It was, we got it from a neighboring church who no longer wanted to manage the facility. It has 183 subsidized senior apartments in the property. When was it? 2010, we received our first HUD ALCP grant, and we converted through the bottom 3 floors of the property, added a commercial kitchen, all the necessities for providing assisted living at the facility. The following year, we applied again for an ALCP grant, won that, and converted 3 more floors. So right now, it's a 13-story building. 6 of those floors are AL, and the remaining 7 are independent living. The other thing we did on the independent living floors was, in conjunction with the assisted living conversion grant, we used the HUD's Green Retrofit program, some funds from that, $1.9 million, to actually replace all the windows on the upper floors, do the roof, and make it really an efficient building throughout. It's really a fantastic property, and we just had our grand opening last week. So the next one I wanted to show was Kiwanis Village. Kiwanis is an old HUD 202. It's 45 units, and we received a tax credit award and $3.3 million renovation of that property. Just turned that over about 3 months ago. And really I guess the great part about this is that not only is the building energy efficient, you can see that through the USGBC's, we got, it is through the LEED for Homes program, we were awarded the status of LEED Gold, or Gold certified, thank you, blah. And pretty awesome in that we got to expand the community space and the community kitchen, so now it is a Meals on Wheels hub for the whole community. We have a walking path that goes around the property and actually connects to the adjacent strip mall center for shopping. We have a new computer room, a fitness facility on the property, and a beauty parlor, which is quite popular. So it's really a transformation of this property. And last but not least is Renaissance Apartments. Renaissance is in Toledo, Ohio. The building was built in the 1800s. It is actually connected to an old theater, the Valentine Theater, and this is a landmark in downtown Toledo. And it was really a distressed property, and in 1993, National Church Residences acquired the property and did a moderate rehab at the time to convert the hotel into senior apartments. But then 2 years ago, we received tax credit award, and we did a, well, where am I? Sorry, I'm going ahead of myself. I wanted to make sure I've got the numbers right. $6.8 million renovation, multi-phased, and it's also on the historic register now, and we received LEED Platinum certification on that under the USGBC LEED for Homes Mid-Rise program. This is also pretty amazing in that we got to really enhance the common areas. All the we now have, it again is also now a Meals on Wheels hub. We have medical offices within the building so that we can bring the seniors medical assistance to the building. They don't have to leave. We really enhance all the community spaces. We have a beauty parlor and we have a chapel, and really it's just its own little community in and of itself. It's quite wonderful. I think that's about it.
Okay, thank you. So Matthias Hollwich is about to blow your mind. So exactly. Passengers, fasten your seatbelt. Matthias.
First of all, I have to stand up. I just came from Israel, had a long flight, so please excuse that I'm going to make a little bit exercise here. And I have an indecent question for all of you guys first. The question is, who is above 40 years old at this point? Raise up your hand, please.
Older?
At least
Older,
At least
older
40.
than 40.
40 plus. Is that everyone up here? Hands
How many
up,
of you
hands
are
up?
lying?
All right, well, so here's the bad news. You are old. You have surpassed 50% of your life expectancy, so there's young and there's old. The good news is, just get over it. Now start to look at your life in a different picture. Stop to discriminate the elderly because they just don't exist. Because that is you and me in a few years from now. And we definitely have to start a revolution. We have to start a revolution against ourselves. The one thing which I don't understand is that there is this wonderful moment of retirement we all anticipate and we want to live up for. But what we don't take really into account, that at some point in our life, there is this moment where we have to move into a different state of our living environment. Nobody wants to be alone. Nobody wants to depend on others. And even more so, nobody wants to ever be stored away. So I don't understand, as an architect, why we're having 17,000 nursing homes in this country who exactly does that to you and me in a few years from now. I also don't understand why we, especially we architects, still build hazardous buildings which are unfit for our own independent future self. And we're allowing urban environments which will trap us. At the moment we lose our driving license, we are stuck. We all are aging, and this is the most wonderful, beautiful thing of our lives. And there's no mystery about it. And thankfully, we're already aware that we have to talk to our doctors and to figure out how our health is, and we're all kind of fit with our pills and so on. We also talk to our financial advisors so that we know at what point we hopefully not run out of money. But what we actually really forget is to talk to the architect, because the architect has literally your future in his hand. And maybe you can see the curve a little bit. There's no mystery about our lives. So this is an aging curve. 100% of the people get born, and then we drop off the planet over time. And in the process, we will lose our driving license. And when we look at 65, already 35%, or I think at 75, 35% of us don't have the possibility anymore to drive a car. The same thing is with the difficulties of just common tasks. It will get harder. There's nothing which is unpredictable in our lives. And then it happens that actually here we're kicking in with this kind of idea of a nursing home. And look at this. 1/3 of the population in America will live in a nursing home, and in average 650 days of their lives. And this is the last experience there is. So what I'm out here to do is to eliminate the typology of the nursing home. That is my declared goal. And how to do so is that I assembled for the first phase a team of 10 amazing architects throughout the world. This includes Dilla Scofidio Renfro, who designed the High Line in New York, Low-Tech, who's doing fantastic kind of pop-up Puma stores and so on. And we all started with an idea which is called BOOM, a bold new community. That community itself, it's a retirement community where we're taking the retirement out of the equation, and it becomes an empowerment community. So how do we do this? That is, of course, the big question. First of all, it's actually really easy. We just have to take into account common life, not the life of the elderly, common life, your life, my life, at any given time. And then we have to add, subtract, and change a couple of things so that with some of the difficulties and expected handicaps, we're still able to live that life. So the prototype we're doing, and we're happy that we have a developer behind us where we can experiment with this idea. It is in Palm Springs. And it's very important that actually the location is well chosen because it wants to be in the middle of urban existing life. It cannot be on a green field. That is already the wrong approach. And then with this 10 different architects, with this 10 bold different visions, where we particularly looked into that we are very diverse as a group of architects so that there's not one solution fitting for all, because again, it's all about diversity, is that we came up with very lifestyle-driven kind of life environments, so where every one of this architect was able to come up with their own kind of interpretation of a future life and future housing environment. And one of them, for example, just as an introduction here, Low-Tech created this new idea of kind of loft-style kind of living within the desert. Zadowuga created ultra-transparency to really engage much more the inside and the outside within the community. Jürgen Meyer connected 3 different homes into one, and he created the kind of trick where he connected the homes within, inside, with kind of transparency, so that even that you have an individual home, you also have the kind of collective as kind of a socializing kind of component. And in our scheme, we created a collection of 22 different homes coming together within an interior courtyard, which becomes also a activity kind of possibility. And here, when we're young and fit, and this is for a gay couple here, a house where the house is maybe the party zone, but can also turn into, of course, the service provision as a transformative opportunity with already pre-considered within the architectural infrastructure. And then, of course, we all don't want to have the kind of nurse coming to our house and everyone knows that maybe we have some kind of challenges. So why not introduce the idea of stealth care, where the things are much more informal and integrated as kind of a almost secretive kind of service provision, so that we get the help we need, but it really loses its kind of stigma, which is kind of embedded in some of the kind of age-related kind of support systems. And then ADA compliance and universal design. This is not designed by us, but when we start to bring that into the design equation at the very beginning, we can use that to really trigger a more beautiful, interesting architectural design. And it's not going to become this grab bars nobody really want to have in the house because it looks already like as a kind of a challenge and a deficit. It needs to be designed and needs to become beautiful in parts of the real integrated features of the building. And the same thing is with also technology. Finally, we have the iPhone that's going to start to talk to us, or we talk to the iPhone. That's going to become so fluid, and when we build that already into the infrastructure, then that will be really the possibility that the house becomes almost a friend for us to support us as a family member in itself. So all of that comes together that we really create a kind of city within the kind of new developed urban kind of context with all this kind of diversity, but then also with all this kind of offerings that we demand from a city. But what was for us very important that we actually pushed the design to the max, and I always call it the kind of fighting age discrimination through the excellence in design, because it doesn't need to look like a elderly housing. It wants to be something which creates curiosity and interest so that it again becomes a social engine between the people outside and inside within the community. And then the infrastructure, of course, we want to have all the kind of pedestrian opportunities in here. We also want to have a hotel or a bed and breakfast so that when guests come in, it's easy to be accomplished, the accommodation within. And then a business center. Who wants to retire if you have the right job you like and have passion for? Because that is self-validation and it's also a key point of longevity principles, so that as long you still work, you will stay healthier and happier. And with that, it's important that in every one of these kind of environments, the continuation of work should be enabled, sometimes also out of necessity, of course, where we all still need to earn a little bit more money in the future. And then, of course, amenities. In this case, it's a little bit more luxurious with kind of a connecting pool, but also, again, with this idea of socializing. Forget your private pool. Just open it up to all your neighbors so that you meet them and greet them and really connect with each other. And that continues with a couple of other ideas of intergenerational playhouse designed by Madeline Gins, who creates architecture against death, with really activation of all the kind of senses. And then the real outdoor, where of course the informal kind of exercising and getting together really kind of manifests itself. And then in our office, we designed the most dangerous nursing home on the planet, the place where you check in and you also check out again, because it becomes just a temporary kind of support system. But it also really want to counter everything what you anticipate from a nursing home. It should be attractive, it should be multi-generational, and how fun will it be when you're even in a wheelchair, you go up to the sky bar and you see somebody climbing over the building and you have an amazing experience in that moment where you may suffer one of the hardest moments in your life. And all of that kind of connects together into this kind of boom, the bold new community. But for us, it's very important that what we are finding out here, that we can make it smaller and bigger. It's not really kind of already fixed to a standard we have developed here. It could also become horizontal and vertical, and we're experimenting also with high-rise topologies with the same kind of ideas in here. And most important is for us that we can scale it up, so that in the end, we also, the metropolis can exchange into the new idea of the Geropolis, where finally the city becomes able and available for all ages at any time in our lives. I believe this is really our revolution, and we have to take it serious, and we have to ingrain it into our own minds and actions so that we really start the change from the ground up, up to the big decision makers. So I call it the new aging revolution, and I hope you're all part of it. Thank you.
That's awesome. Fantastic.
Matthias, let me start with you. Just go right back at you, which is the chapter that I wrote in this book, that Michael and I wrote in this book, was saying that in the US, we've created 19 standard product types that Wall Street knows how to finance, the banks know how to finance, we in real estate know how to build, formula-driven, simple, drivable, suburban-oriented, what's not to like? They've all been blown up. And you're suggesting to blow up assisted living, nursing homes, retirement communities, all these things that you could put the word dread it in front of and it would just be most attractive. So do we need new product types? I mean, having these formulas, it makes it easy to finance. Wall Street can get behind it real quickly. Do we need new formulas? Or is this something that's sort of a organic, bottom-up kind of thing, everything's handmade?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there are different avenues to go, but I really call it the common sense approach. If we really just look at ourselves and we see how we want to live in the future, and we just realize it will just not differ from the way how we want to live today. It's also in terms of like the elderly. I have never met an elderly in this world. It's always an older person. So it cannot be like a product which you just create for that kind of gray mass of people which are apparently somewhere. No, it has to become really something extremely individual, and when we enable it, that it actually happens through kind of more of a grassroots kind of endorsement, then it also will be much more resilient and workable, because the key is also the need and necessity for re-socialization and creating a new social glue between the people, and you cannot create that as a product. It needs to come authentically out of the population itself.
So it's growing from the grassroots. So Ellen, going out and dealing with big boxes that were the epitome of the 19 standard product types. I mean, that's one of the 19. And now you're talking about converting them. So two questions. One is, are these organic from the dirt that grow up? Or is this a possible product type in the future? But then the second question is, something tells me there's going to be thousands of people that are otherwise known as NIMBYs. They're going to fight you tooth and nail. How do you deal with NIMBY opposition?
I'll take the first question first in order. I mean, I think absolutely, big boxes were built, just plowed out. There was very little local
just
consideration.
Turn the crank
it's just
and plop, plop, plop.
Absolutely a product type. And what's really been interesting is that I'd say before the recession, during the boom years, most of the retrofits were developer-led. And basically, the developer saw that here's this dead property, I can buy this cheap, and yet it's actually got great infrastructure. It's located in an area where there's a lot of folks. They're frankly isn't so much NIMBY opposition, because the same neighbors who normally would absolutely fight tooth and nail about increasing density and mixing uses and having to change the zoning, they're looking at a dead mall or a dead big box, and they know that's bringing their property values down. So the same folks the NIMBYs who normally oppose this stuff are suddenly actually looking at their planning department saying, what have you got? You know, help us. So if a developer's, that was what was happening a lot during the boom years. The developers were actually able to make deals, get the stars to align, change the zoning, but it was happening just on a one-off, one at a time. Since the recession, one of the things that's happened is that a lot of the municipal planners working in communities, I mean, they were bombarded during the boom years. They were only in a reactive mode. The recession has allowed them to become much more proactive and actually sit down and talk with their communities. What future do we want to envision? What about this whole corridor of not just one dead big box, but just aging properties all along that? What do we want this to be? How do we change our zoning, in general, changing from the use-based zoning to more form-based zoning codes, so that when the economy recovers, if the economy recovers, we can attract the kind of development that we want? And they're being much more proactive about it now. And so that actually the momentum now has really shifted more towards the public sector driving a lot of these projects and working with the community to, ahead of any development proposal, actually decide, okay, how tall, what kind of, you know, we know we're going to have to maybe grow above and beyond what we might have thought of this corridor as only a 1 to 2 story corridor. I mean, here in DC, we're seeing corridors go from 1 to 2 story up to 8 and even up to 30 suddenly. So those kinds of rapid changes are really happening both at the public sector is doing a lot of this stuff, private sector. The big question is really trying to get Wall Street to recognize these as more standardized types. And there's work being done to try to create new mixed use as a new asset class. Congress for the New Urbanism and Locus, Smart Growth America, I know are working on these things. But that's and that is absolutely, I think, the next big challenge. It
really is one of our challenges, because if you can't communicate to Wall Street, funny thing, the golden rule works. He with the gold rules. And if you can't get their money into these projects, then it's just very difficult to get the financing in place. And if you do get the financing, it's very expensive. So, Christine, you're talking about preserving a lot of affordable housing that, I mean, we know a lot of the affordable housing programs have a limited life to them. And so you're coming in at the end of the 15 years when it's going to revert to market. How do you preserve that housing, and how do you get the mixed uses that Matthias just talked about into what were, when they were built, one of the 19 standard product types that were outstanding in their field, i.e. they were single purpose, not connected to the rest of the world?
Well, we're finding that there are, at least how we're preserving it, we're doing a lot of purchasing of distressed properties. And we're finding that a lot of these are faith-based organizations that at one time had this great vision of what they were going to do, and then really the recession hit and this just, the bottom fell out. We've been lucky to have a lot of associations across the, you know, kind of financial associations, the MacArthur Foundation being one of them. They provide us with sort of bridge loans. We've gotten kind of loans with them, and we're able to kind of buy these distressed properties in conjunction with the MacArthur Foundation money, and then we're able to hold them, stabilize them, and then basically we're working with home funds and you know, tax credits, any type of funding we can find out there to basically rehab these buildings, often providing services. I mean, we're really trying to bring healthcare into every facility we're doing, you know, kind of rehabbing. We're finding that if we can do kind of a telemedicine idea where the resident can actually go, there's a a nurse on staff. They can go in and basically get their primary care physician on the, telemedicine-wise, and the nurse is there to basically take vitals and to assist with medication discussions and things like that. I mean, it really stabilizes a community if you can have the health care and really the services brought to the property. And so a long way around it is that's how we're kind of doing it. But it's very difficult. I mean, it's really a difficult challenge. I can't wait to see what you do.
So here we are in Washington, D.C. Metro Washington is the model by which we're building and rebuilding the built environment. There are more examples of walkable urban places in Metro Washington than any other metro area in the country. And I can not only just say that, but believe it or not, I've got some numbers to back it up. Normally I just make those things up, but I actually have numbers to back that up. Mm-hmm. And 70% of these walkable urban places are in the suburbs. Mm-hmm. So point out some of these models that are taking place that those of you that live here in the district may not know about them because they're out in Montgomery County and Fairfax and, of course, everybody's favorite, Arlington.
Well, I mean, the first way to find them is get on Metro and start taking it out on the new lines. I mean, in D.C., different markets, different factors have really triggered a lot of the retrofitting of the suburbs. In D.C., it's absolutely been the extension of Metro Rail, so that pretty much everywhere that Metro Rail has gone, the first story, certainly the Ballston corridor, growing into now the area part of the country with the highest transit ridership per capita anywhere in the country. And it went from a very suburban area, but they took a long time to build it. But now we're certainly out in Rockville Pike and all along. Twin Brook is coming along, lots more. Certainly Tyson's Corner is going to be, I think, a really interesting project to watch. Taking this edge city that is now 20 plus years old and completely auto-dependent. So is bringing transit to it going to be enough to really make it a great walkable urban place? And that's going to be one of the big questions going ahead. But I think it happens on the one hand with transit. It's not only transit that is the trigger. It is often sometimes these just aging properties. And it happens also in areas where there's a slow market. DC is an exceptionally hot market in the country right now.
There are 15 cranes in the sky right now, all walkable urban transit served.
Yeah, but I mean, some of the places where we've been really quite surprised in parts of the quote-unquote the Rust Belt, whether it's Cleveland, Detroit, Flint, where as some of these suburban properties built in the 50s and 60s, I mean, the average lifespan of a mall is about 25, 30 years. We built a lot of them in the 70s. Guess what? Mm-hmm. A third of them are dead or dying right now. And in places where the market is very soft or even shrinking, it often really makes sense, and gets back sort of to the NIMBY question, to regreen them. You turn them into parks, it increases property values around it as opposed to the dead property. And yet then there's ways you can try to re-trigger more activities around there. So it's not, DC is a really great example. Denver, it's been just the fact of dead malls. 8 out of Denver's 13 regional malls have announced plans to retrofit. So they have really figured that one out, kind of in Denver. But it's just, you have different triggers in different places. It's not so systematic, and I think that's actually one of the questions. And sort of getting back to, Matthias, I think the suburbs tended to be produced in this really generic fashion. It all kind of looks alike. Tom Wolfe famously said the only way to tell in Atlanta that you'd left one community and entered the next was that the chain stores started repeating. So the idea, I think, certainly is that the opportunity of these landscapes kind of dying now is we get a makeover. We get to do it better. We get to do it in a much more sustainable manner and make them much more unique places. But we still need a certain amount of standardization in order to make it affordable and in order to be able to finance these things. So So it's a tricky balance.
So that reminds me of the great Garrison Keillor phrase that, that in the long run, all solutions are temporary, and we get these makeovers. We get the Etch-a-Sketch, we can do it. So, Matthias, thinking about transportation, you talked about, I mean, Ellen was just talking about how important Metro was to the growth here. And and you were talking about how many people who, as they age, aren't going to have that plastic, get out of jail free card, a driver's license. What is the role transportation plays in this revolution?
Well, I mean, there are two solutions, right? The one is retrofit, and the other one, it's, I mean, I'm working on this new aging book, and that is chapter number 2. Do it earlier than later. If you realize you live at the wrong location, but hopefully you realize it when you're 50 or 40, and not when you're 85, move.
Makes a whole lot of sense to me. I mean, that the best defense is not to be in a bad location.
Yeah, so I mean, it's basically if you can see an opportunity to reconfigure, and I mean, all these ambitions are fantastic, right? And this is all the beauty right now of the moment of breathing and seeing a crisis and finding solutions. But some places are not fixable. Yeah, and then get out as quickly as you can. Obviously, lots of people bought the properties, the value goes down, they cannot sell it. That is an absolute disaster.
And we certainly know that, I mean, this great recession was caused at its heart by the collapse of the drivable suburban fringe. That, and particularly in this market, out on the fringe is where housing values dropped by 50, 60%, while the walkable urban stuff just went flat. So now the most expensive housing in this region are the walkable urban places. 20 years ago, many of those were slums, and the most expensive were places like Great Falls and McLean that were drivable suburban. So if folks have questions, begin to queue up at the 2 microphones. I'd like to talk about how we get ourselves out of this. We've been building drivable suburban for 60 years. What are the public policy things that we need to be thinking about that we need to do to get ourselves out of this fix? Christine, Ellen, any thoughts right now?
Sure. One of the hats that I wear, and very proudly, I'm the incoming chair of the board of the Congress for the New Urbanism. And CNU has really been working now for 20 years on reforming the standards, the practices by which we build the built environment. Because basically, right, it's illegal in most of the country to build walkable urbanism. Our zoning codes, our building codes, our finance procedures are still, for the most part, making it extremely difficult. One really easy fix, I wish every state, the state of Texas has taken the lead in adopting the Institute of Transportation Engineers' new manual for walkable urban thoroughfares. This is a booklet put together by Congress for New Urbanism with Institute of Transportation Engineers. It is now a recommended practice, and it is the first time in 50 years that a manual for transportation engineers does not refer to sidewalks as vehicle recovery zones, nor does it refer to trees as fixed hazardous objects, which is what the otherwise current manuals all do. So, I mean, in this manual, it's a recommended practice. It doesn't have to be adopted. It doesn't really, it's a purely symbolic gesture, but it's a way to let the transportation engineers in your state know that this is now the new recommendations, that we do need to design complete streets, and we need for our urban thoroughfares need to be much more walkable. So to me, that's one of the really just easy ones. I think there's so many more initiatives, and specific on the retrofit, it's very interesting. In South Carolina right now, an act has passed the House and Senate. It's basically just waiting for the governor's signature, called the Commercial Center Revitalization Act, which will require communities to actually map and document, so how much underperforming property do they have, and what are the opportunities, and begin to plan. put into their comp plans. All right, what are you going to do with all this stuff? And then begin to link that then with opportunities for some public funding to begin to revitalize these places. And this is in South Carolina, you know, an extremely conservative state, but that does recognize that these are not partisan issues. These are, you know, you can approach this from the perspective of purely financial, this is a waste of money land, or you can approach it from, boy, this is an opportunity now, if the public, especially if the public sector is getting involved, to really engage public health, public policy for all the best ambitions.
Christine?
Well, I'd like to interject that it seems to me that I spend a lot of time on applications for funding with housing authorities, and your idea, you know, hearing about these changes in policy in terms of in states, why can't that be adopted by the housing authorities in terms of awarding credits, tax credits, things like that? I mean, most of the, you know, our applications, they say, well, it'd be nice if you would do this, but it isn't a mandate. You know, I'm still going to get an award even if I'm out in the middle of a cornfield. And it seems to me that the idea is that it has to start where the money starts. They have to mandate it.
You know, one of the things that drives me crazy is the concept of granny flats for all the surplus bedrooms that we have in this country. Yeah. Now here's something. Here's a statement that I have absolutely no background. I have no data, so I can make a really clear statement, a clear supposition, but nobody else has any data, so you can't contradict me. I think we have 150 million surplus bedrooms in this country that could be rented out as affordable housing or senior housing, and that's why they call them granny flats. So the question is, why is it illegal to rent out surplus bedrooms that are sitting there having to be heated and air conditioned year round? Any other public policy recommendations? Matthias?
Well, I mean, it's always interesting to also look over the borders. Like Germany has...
No. We can't look. I mean, Americans only can look at America. Now, Europe is off base. Please, go ahead.
Sorry, so I didn't have to look over the border when I used to live in Germany. And so with the reunification, there was suddenly a surplus of 1 million apartments in East Germany. And I think it went exactly through the same kind of trouble, figuring out what to do. And at the beginning, they were just demolishing these buildings to maintain the real estate kind of stock. But then they figured out that actually this is a great opportunity in some of the cities, and Berlin changed the course to really offer it to the underserved population. And I think
so. Even in East Berlin, that design can solve almost any problem.
Well, I wanted to pick up on the design aspect.
At least that's what all my architects friends tell me.
Seattle has actually become one of the leaders now in making it legal to have both accessory dwelling units and detached accessory dwelling units. And part of what they did to build the public's appetite for this and overcome a lot of the resistance was to have a design competition. And then they built the 3 best winners in different neighborhoods and sort of showed that, you know, these are actually attractive. They can be very nice. It's nothing to be so afraid of. There's a great role for design competitions to actually help people see that change is possible. I think especially in the suburbs, one of the things that June and I talk about is how our country expects our downtowns to be dynamic and ever-changing with building cranes as a good sign of a healthy economy. There is an expectation culturally that the suburbs will remain forever frozen in whatever initial development form they were first built in, and I have a right, you know, to not expect to see any change. And yet, so it's really important to just show examples before and after. Hey, this really change is actually really positive. You know, it can be a scary thing, but
that's the thing that drives me really crazy about our country today, is that we are so conservative with a small case C. We're just so afraid of change. And, you know, that's where the NIMBY opposition comes from. That's where, you know, oh my Lord, a new idea that came from a city that didn't start with W in its first, you know, its first letters W. It doesn't apply here. We're just so afraid.
Well, and I hate to say it, because here we are at a symposium really trying to celebrate the contributions that our older population can make. But I will say that actually in terms of some of that NIMBY resistance, it is often most likely to come from those older residents of neighborhoods who, my heart goes out to them. I really respect people who are willing to give their time to serve on a local planning board. That's you know, really a great work to be doing. But too often, those planning boards are dominated by folks who have retired and so have time to serve on those boards, and who are trying to protect their neighborhoods for the demographic that existed when they first moved in 40 years ago. And they are frankly just so out, that demographic is not there anymore. 2/3 of suburban households do not have kids in them. We are quickly approaching the 3/4 of suburban households. If you want to protect your neighborhood, you really need to be thinking about not just where you want to live, but look at your grandkids. and so, you know, I think the boomers especially, we created youth culture. We're in such denial about aging and getting old, and boy, we're sort of
Get over it. Guess what? Every day
yeah,
we are getting older,
and
and it's a whole lot better than the alternative, I'll tell you.
The message of thinking about it at 40 is a really important one. It's really good.
Definitely.
So
Yes.
we here in DC have actually two great examples of NIMBYs becoming YIMBYs. Yes, in my backyard. And one of them is what you mentioned, Ellen, Tyson's Corner. The other one's White Flint up in Montgomery County. Both now have triple the density of what is on the ground today.
Wow.
And guess what? The neighborhood groups around those two projects went to the barricade saying, damn it, increase that density. We want White Flint to be like downtown Bethesda. And we want Tyson's Corner to be like Arlington. They had the examples that they could learn from. And that led, you know, all of a sudden the neighborhood groups were becoming educated. So it is not impossible to see these NIMBY groups become YIMBYs. We have a question. Hey, how are you?
Hi. Brett Van Akron, U.S. EPA Office of Sustainable Communities. We've got a lot of examples, and Ellen and all you up there are talking about all these examples of things we can do. And we've got in front of here, we have all the data, what's going to happen. When you plan, it takes 10 years from when you start doing your planning for anything to be built. We don't have 10 years. We need change, and we need it fast. How do we take all these little things and how do, you know, all these little individual things, and how do we scale it up fast? Because we don't have 10 years.
What do you think?
Well, one of the things which was interesting in my experience when I started to work on age-related kind of architectural question, very quickly I came to the point that it's not just architects. It really has to start grassroots everywhere. And I think when we really start to realize what the challenges are, make it personal, then there is a lot of movement that can really be exercised. It can really not come top down. That will take much too long. It needs to come bottom up, and at least that is my kind of call for action. And that's why it cannot be, it needs to be a revolution. It cannot be an evolution. It needs to go rapid and with that same kind of energy.
I think it's such an important question. How can we do it faster than we are? And I wish I really had a positive answer. I mean, I do think our country's model of affordable housing has been drive till you qualify, as Chris mentioned. I think the only real alternative we have out there is transit-served corridors. But those take a long time. We just don't have a fast way to really build those. Those are the big projects, and we need to keep working on them. And we've added, I know of at least 50 new corridor projects kind of just in the last 2 years. So we're at least starting that long path. But in the meantime, I think the faster things are going to be the re-inhabiting big box, which means you're still in an auto-dependent area, but you're at least, again, starting. Those are the sort of fast things you can begin to do. Yeah. And the accessory dwelling unit laws, repeal those and allow for a lot more grassroots, immediate stuff.
Piggybacking on that transportation drives development. So Ellen's point is exactly right. We need to get the transit lines in, and here in DC, we need to maintain our transit system obviously far better. But the great hope is there have been hundreds of ballot measures over the last 7 years, 8 years, that have been floated to raise taxes at the local level. Hundreds, of which 70% were for rail transit. Of those that were for rail transit, 70% passed in this anti-tax time. And over the next few months, it's going to be Atlanta and Kansas City. And there are ballot measures out there throughout the country. And so hopefully one of the things we can do real fast is to get the transportation bill through the Congress. And the Senate's passed a great transportation bill. The House is going to conference with the Senate. They just agreed this week to go to conference without a bill and to get this thing through by the end of June. And ideally we'll have a transportation bill that will back up all this local support for rail transit that can build these kind of places. So.
My name is Jeff Levine. I'm a local architect and planner. And I would just like to, first of all, piggyback on the idea of 10 years. I think that actually in 10 years is going to be the most critical time for us baby boomers, because at the moment I think we're in a fairly good physical shape. But by 10 years' time, there's more of us going to be regarding things and saying, oh my God, I don't want a ramp and I don't want to have grab bars. That's important. And I just want to also just make one other quick observation, then I have a question, and that is that Matthias here, I want to certainly thank him because he talks about, in terms of time, 40 plus, but I went to a conference organized by Matthias in Philadelphia, and it was incredible that this was where students were involved at a much earlier age that have never been involved, nor have their teachers, in the concept of mortality. And I think that it was just incredible, this. But my question is, knowing, it seemed like all three of you, the commonality was that you were interested in brownfields or retrofit as means of implementation. I'd like you to go a little further with that, because I'm not sure why, other than politically, that that's a good thing to do, and that it's great from the idea of the environment. But is that the only approach, or should we be looking at a totally new paradigm?
Matthias, since your name was used in vain, you want to go first?
Of course, as an architect, we are so interested in the new paradigm, and of course want to build new cities. And actually, I'm running for the same University of Pennsylvania, right now a competition against 10 other universities to design high-density new city in Korea for an aging population. So I think, there are a lot of I think it would be beautiful to do, but I think we have to work actually on the broad spectrum. And for me, it's very important just to really think about people right now already in their living conditions. And most important is this kind of rooting of people, and to take that serious as one of the key components to maintain and to allow the life within the contexts people are used to. So that's maybe why the fallback right now, it's more into the kind of existing conditions. But I would actually love to speculate that probably with the same group of students, they're very hungry and eager actually to get their teeth into big challenges.
Christine?
Well, I'd just like to interject. I don't know, somebody mentioned the whole concept of halfback, right? Right.
Well, Mayor Littlefield.
Yes, that was. And but it's interesting. we've found that the senior populations that we serve are usually within a 10-mile radius of the property. I mean, that's where their single-family home was. They no longer can live there. They're moving to our one of our facilities, and it tends to be more of an urban or suburban location rather than out in the middle of nowhere. They want to be with other people. It's more of an idea of socialization, and they are losing their cars. They want to be able to walk. They want to be able to get to the doctor and be more independent and not, have to rely on their daughter-in-law to take them to go get milk, things like that. So I think it's really important to maintain that urbanism or suburbanism and really retain that housing stock that you already have there. It's good. It just needs to be transformed, and you need to look at it in a different light. And how do we change the way people think of aging, and how do we house people in that way?
Yeah. I would just add that I think attitudes towards retirement are very generational, and a previous generation really bought into whether it's Sun City or the sort of an entire city for 55 plus, or whether it's the retirement home surrounded by a lot of landscaping out pretty far in the exurbs. But even within the retirement industry, their own polling shows that very clearly the boomers are what demographers sometimes call the yippies, youthful, energetic, elderly people into everything. They want to be engaged. They want to volunteer in activities. They want to walk places. They want to shop places. And they want to do that in the same suburban community they live in now. So that a lot of the retrofits, the suburban retrofits, it's with most people who are moving in from within that same larger community, but they're giving up their large lot, single-family home, and now moving in. Now this is providing another choice for them. I think we still have plenty of the big retirement boxes out in the exurbs out there. So I think right now we're better off focusing on some other, expanding the choices rather than, there's room for innovation within that model. And there certainly will be people that I think will prefer that one. But it's a pretty small percentage of the population that actually even wants or expects to move into a retirement community far, away.
Yeah, I think this point is a really important one to shift our thinking on. We have been doing for 60 years greenfield development. We have been sprawling like no other civilization in the 6,000 years that we've been building cities. So we've tried that experiment, and we wanted it, we built it, it's over. I think over the next generation, we don't need to add another square mile to metropolitan America. We are 8 times less dense than metropolitan Paris. And I don't think anybody would complain or would say that metropolitan Paris doesn't have a very high quality of life that a lot of seniors would love to live in. Personally, I don't think we need to build one more new road, and I don't think we need to add another square mile of greenfield. We have plenty of land. We stole the land fair and square. We have a lot of it. Please.
Name is Lee Schoenecker. I'm a retired urban planner. I like what Jeff Levine said 10 years from now. And I think I'm talking about getting ready. I think within the next 5 to 15 years, as the bow wave of all the seniors, the 1946 and on, really begin to retire, if you're ready with demonstrations, you're ready with this, you're ready with this, and certainly you're moving along those lines. I think, by about the time 2020, that's when you're going to have the real transformation. It takes time. Mr. Leinberger, you've even said it started about 1993, 1994.
That's where it started.
17, 18 years out from that. But with this big bow wave, I think that's when it's going to really happen, and we ought to be prepared for that. And I'd like to get some reaction from somebody about the timing and the dynamics of it.
So the timing is?
It's now. It's already happening.
Yeah. Get with it.
But is it happening in a big way yet? Around this room, we think.
Is it happening in a big way?
Well, I really would say, certainly in terms of the suburban retrofits, and they're not all of them specifically targeting older populations, but when June and I in 2008, June and I had 80 cases in our database. We now have over 300. Most of that's been added since the recession. So I think this is growing. And there's nothing scientific. There's tons of projects we're missing. Those are just the projects that we've happened to have found.
20 years ago here in Metro DC, there were 2 walkable urban places, Georgetown, Old Town. Today, there are 43 regionally significant walkable urban places. That evolution, most of the building permits that are underway right now are high-density walkable urban.
Well, I think there's one other detail which I always find interesting. It's also that people are getting older. So with that, we obviously have that kind of more people above 65. But the amount of people who are really challenged in terms of physical and social kind of deficits, it's not growing in the same percentage. Actually, the period of time people have these challenges is shorter. Yeah. So there's a little bit kind of a thankful buffer, I think, in the whole kind of calculation, where maybe people run earlier out of money because they live longer. That is a big challenge. But in terms of making the infrastructure fit, it is something which is not on that kind of over-dimensional crisis, but it's urgent. Yeah. So when we talk about the 10 years, I think it's a good time frame actually to operate and be now very disciplined and focused and to work on it. But when it kicks in, it's a little bit distorted by where we always think, oh, the number will double. The number of people above 65 will double, but not the number of people who are dependent will double that quickly.
Yeah, it is interesting that the baby boomers are the last generation to have a memory of great walkable urbanism as a kid. The Gen Xers and the millennials are the ones that their childhood memories is about drive-thrus. So we have to harvest those memories over the next 10 years. Yes?
Bob Rohr, writer based here in D.C. I disagree with you on only 2 walkable neighborhoods in D.C. 20 years ago, but let's get on to my question instead of that. You talked about transit corridors. Is the quality of that transit corridor important? And I'm thinking in particular of the talk of the I-70 corridor here, 270 corridor here now, where they're thinking, well, let's do buses because it's cheaper, and the decision in Tyson's where they decided to go above ground instead of underground. So could you talk a little bit about the quality of what makes a transit corridor good as opposed to less good?
Ellen?
The urban designers have probably for the last 20 years, there's just countless examples of folks sort of drawing, here's today's commercial strip corridor, and let's make it a boulevard. And I know of 2 that have been built of that type. Now, that it's because it is extremely expensive. But when you make it a true multi-way boulevard lined with trees in the medians that provide a safety refuge, but the trees that actually both provide safety for the pedestrian, but also make it grand, make it elegant, make it, the Champs-Élysées is a 10-lane highway, and the most desirable, one of the most desirable places on the planet, because it's designed as a beautiful boulevard with wonderful trees. That then people would be happy to be living alongside, and people are very happy to walk long distances along when it's a great example. I don't think that, I'm not convinced that, that there's a huge difference between whether it's bus rapid transit or light rail. I think bus rapid transit can be just as workable and work in great ways. But I do think the character of the corridor, if you really want people to walk along it, if you want people to willingly choose to live along it and develop it at high density, like the Champs-Élysées in Paris, you have to design it beautifully. And unfortunately, we don't have as many examples of that as I wish we did, and we certainly don't have much money for it in the country right now.
Any reactions?
No, I agree.
Yeah. I will say, though, that I've seen billions of dollars invested at rail transit stops.
Yes.
I've yet to see $1 invested at a bus stop. Now, I hope bus rapid transit will become more like rail transit as far as how the market reacts to it. But
Eugene, Oregon, there's been some redevelopment where they put in
I was just there.
a little bit.
But the jury's out on bus rapid transit, and I hope it works. But certainly we know that rail transit, the private sector will put money at rail transit stations. Yes?
I do agree on that the raised rail at Tyson's is certainly adding
Missed
to
opportunity.
the dimension of difficulty that has now added to try to really make Tyson's a walkable place that people will willingly invest and want to live right next to the transit station. I mean, the advantage of living next to transit. I mean, when we have the raised rail systems, or when we have elevated urban highways, they provide great connectivity, but nobody wants to live or to have their building right up next to them. When we put them on the ground and make them surface boulevards, then they become attractive places. They become the most,
and of course, better yet is to put them underground.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Actually, I just want to chip in with this idea of planting in trees. There was a beautiful example in Kassel in Germany after the war. Beuys, the artist, created a project which was 5,000 trees for the city, and he invited people to pick up the trees, walk with them into the neighborhood, dig out a hole and put the tree in, and the trees are still there. The whole city became totally beautified, and it became a volunteering and a grassroots kind of effort. So sometimes it's like with this kind of ambition of greenery and more workable kind of areas, when we translate that also in a kind of a participatory process, maybe it becomes cheaper, it becomes more personal, and in the end, livable.
Yes.
My name is Kevin.
Two more questions.
Kevin Sullivan. I'm a consultant to the American Architectural Foundation.
Can you move closer?
And we had Matthias with us last February for an all-day conference. And one role of architects, as Matthias showed us, is they can present images very quickly and give you new models. And I don't think enough architects are actually doing that right now, dealing with this generation. But that's something very striking. What we heard all day at our conference was a lack of images and models that give people some sense of what you can do. And then the other perspective is that I worked in politics for 25 years and did lots of campaigns, and I think there's a need for a social marketing campaign which isn't going towards boomers, but should be going to the next generation of boomers coming behind us who are in their 50s, who are starting to do it with their parents, and the Gen X group and the millennials. And you can make a campaign like safety belts or not smoking, that if you keep mom and dad out of the hospital and nursing home, you keep the bucks. And that this audience and this group ought to be thinking about those generations behind us and how you market to them so they can come in to do the push to make these things happen.
Actually, one of the really great things about marketing, I think, to the opportunities to market and engage younger folks in a lot of this. There's a movement sort of called tactical urbanism, which is there are a lot of underemployed architects and planners and landscape architects out there right now. And so some of them have started doing kind of guerrilla urbanism, do-it-yourself urbanism.
Yes. Good stuff.
And it might be whether it's having a food truck rodeo or it's chair bombing. My students last weekend got a bunch of shipping pallets and working with folks from the local middle school and folks from the local senior center built just Adirondack chairs out of the shipping pallets, and then also filled some whiskey barrels with planters and herbs for the spring. And then they just distributed them, painted them, and swings. They built swings and had the kids paint the swings. And then they just sort of installed them in different places. And various of the seniors sort of adopted, all right, I'm going to take care of this whiskey barrels planters, whereas the young kids were sort of, well, we're going to come and swing with you then out there. And it's just, how to do little tiny micro bursts of community building efforts that take some, and they're just putting them on private property, public property, who cares? They're just sort of putting them around the town. And
this is this great guerrilla gardening that has been emerging. Yes?
That gentleman's comments were a good segue to the question I have. I have visions of large tracts of land, which once were malls, now being redeveloped in very high density housing. And my question for you as people age is, where will the caregivers live?
I'm sorry, where
will the caregivers live? How do you react? This gets back to affordable housing. Christine, where?
Well, again, I think it goes back to building in more urban or fringe suburban areas where the caregivers come. I can tell you that when we design or redevelop a property, our parking lot is not for our seniors. Generally, some of them have cars or symbolic cars. They don't really move. They're there, but they don't actually drive them. But really, it's for the caregivers. I mean, really, truly, that our parking lots are full and constantly in flux because of the caregivers coming to our properties. It's really important that we provide, again, goes back to the being on a transit line in that, so our caregivers can easily, serve our senior population.
But of course, better yet, if they lived within walking distance,
absolutely,
all the better.
I mean, I think that's sort of why, in general, we've been talking about strategies that are not just about how to design specifically for the elderly or how to just design for senior housing, because the problem is one of how to create more opportunities for people to whether it's to create more NORCs and to create more walkable places that are more compact, that allow for the caregivers and the elderly, everybody's living in much closer proximity.
Correct.
Yeah, and I think we also really have to break down a little bit what kind of that vision of our own home is. I live, for example, in New York with 3 other people. It always sounds like, oh, the poor architect hangs out with his friends. But the beauty is we have 3 floors and we share a common space. And we have the best kind of house community. And when people come visit, they suddenly realize that it becomes actually a very interesting prototype of a new way of living. And for my own future self, I'm planning actually with 3 of my best friends just to have a apartment structure where it's almost you have your studio apartments for yourself, 1 communal space and 1 extra apartment you first rent out to whoever, and later on you can bring in the caregiver into your own home and have pre-anticipated that. And if you plan it early, you can also build that into that kind of structure.
So I think we now can see that this is not our grandparents or our fathers' built environment, that we need a fundamental shift in how we think about this. It's far more complex, but if we don't make this shift, many of us will be left out in the cold and in places that we would rather not be. I'd like to thank the 3 panelists.